James, Morrison, Weatherby, George Dupree, took great care of his mother, though he was only 3. Mother, he said he, you must never go down to the end of the town if you don't go down with me. James, Morrison's mother put on a golden gown. James, Morrison's mother drove to the end of the town. James, Morrison's mother said to herself, said she, I can get right down to the end of the town and be back in time for tea. King John put up a notice. Lost or stolen or strayed, James, Morrison's mother seems to have been mislaid. Last seen wandering vaguely, quite of her own accord, she tried to get down to the end of the town, 40 shillings reward. James, Morrison, commonly known as Jim, told his other relations not to go blaming him. James said to his mother, Mother, he said he, you must never go down to the end of the town without consulting me. I wonder what this is all about. James Morrison's mother hasn't been heard of since. King John said he was sorry, and so did the Queen and Prince. King John, somebody told me, said to a man he knew, if people go down to the end of the town, well, what can anyone do? JMMWGDB took great care of his mother, though he was only. J said to his M. He said he, you must never go down to the end of the town if you don't go down with me. This is one of my favorite books, and my dad read it to me, and I read it to my dad, or your dad. And I like how these poems sound. If people ask me, I always tell them, quite well, thank you, I'm very glad to say. If people ask me, I always answer, quite well, thank you, how are you today? I always answer, I always tell them, if they ask me politely, but sometimes I wish they wouldn't. Jonathan Joe has a mouth like an O and a wheelbarrow full of surprises. If you ask for a bat or something like that, he's got it, whatever the size is. If you're wanting a ball, it's no trouble at all. Why, the more that you ask for, the merrier. Like a hoop and a top and a watch that won't stop and some sweets and an Aberdeen Terrier. Jonathan Joe has a mouth like an O. But this is what makes him so funny. If you give him a smile only once in a while, then he never expects any money. Oh, I like this one. I remember being your size and having my dad read it to me. It's called At the Zoo. There are lions and roaring tigers and enormous camels and things. There are buffalo bisons and a great big bear with wings. There's a sort of a tiny hippopotamus and a tiny rhinoceros too. But I gave buns to the elephant when I went down to the zoo. There are badgers and bidgers and bodgers and a superintendent's house. There are masses of goats in a polar and different kinds of a mouse. And I think there's a sort of a something that is called a wallaboo. But I gave buns to the elephant when I went down to the zoo. If you try to talk to the bison, well, he never quite understands. And you can't shake hands with a Mingo. He doesn't like shaking hands. And lions and roaring tigers hate saying, how do you do? But I give buns to the elephant when I go down to the zoo. Rice pudding. Comfy? What is the matter with Mary Jane? She's crying with all her might and main, and she won't eat her dinner. Rice pudding again. What is the matter with Mary Jane? What is the matter with Mary Jane? I've promised her dolls and a daisy chain, and a book about animals all in vain. What is the matter with Mary Jane? What is the matter with Mary Jane? She's perfectly well and she hasn't a pain. But look at her, now she's beginning again. What is the matter with Mary Jane? What is the matter with Mary Jane? I've promised her sweets and a ride in the train, and I've begged her to stop for a bit and explain what is the matter with Mary Jane. What is the matter with Mary Jane? She's perfectly well, she hasn't a pain, and it's lovely rice pudding for dinner again. What is the matter with Mary Jane? What do you think is the matter with Mary Jane? Do you think she likes rice pudding? I don't think so. Oh, I love this one. It's called The King's Breakfast. So this book is so old, we don't even have a king, we have a queen. And she's in England. Okay. This is what it looks like. See, they're even wearing like the old-fashioned clothes. Okay. So this one's one of my favorite ones. The king asked the queen, and the queen asked the dairymaid, could we have some butter for the royal slice of bread? And the queen asked the dairymaid, and the dairymaid said, certainly, I'll go and tell the cow now before she goes to bed. The dairymaid, she curtsied and went and told the Alderney, don't forget the butter for the royal slice of bread. The Alderney said sleepily, you better tell His Majesty that many people nowadays like marmalade instead. The Alderney is the cow. The cow's talking and saying other people like marmalade instead. I don't think the cow wants to give up any milk that's going to be made into butter. Anyway, let's read on. The dairymaid said fancy and went to Her Majesty. She curtsied to the Queen and she turned a little red. Excuse me, Your Majesty, for taking up the liberty, but marmalade is tasty if it's very thickly spread. The Queen said, oh, and went to His Majesty, talking of the butter for the royal slice of bread. Many people think that marmalade is nicer. Would you like to try a little marmalade instead? The king said, bother. And then he said, oh, dearie me. The king sobbed, oh, dearie me, and went back to bed. Nobody, he whimpered, could call me a fussy man. I only want a little bit of butter for my bread. The queen said, there, there, and went to the dairymaid. The dairymaid said, there, there, and went to the shed. The cow said, there, there, I didn't really mean it. Here's milk for his porringer and butter for his bread. The queen took the butter and brought it to His Majesty. The king said, butter, eh? And bounced out of bed. Nobody, he said as he kissed her tenderly. Nobody, he said as he slid down the banisters. Nobody, my darling, could call me a fussy man, but I do like a little bit of butter for my bread. So happy. This next one is fun too. It's called Hoppity. And for some of these stories, you can even just close your eyes and just curl up because they have a nice cadence. They sound nice. Christopher Robin goes hoppity, 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 hop. Whenever I tell him politely to stop it, he says, I can't possibly stop. If he stopped hopping, he couldn't go anywhere. Poor little Christopher couldn't go anywhere. That's why he always goes hoppity, 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 hop. Do you like to hop? I like to hop. Here's another one of my favorite ones. It's called At Home. It looks like this. You see the soldier. His hat is called a busby. He guards the palace. I want a soldier in a busby. I want a soldier to come and play with me. I give him cream cakes, big ones, sugar ones. I'd give him cream cakes and cream for his tea. I want a soldier, a tall one, a red one. I want a soldier who plays on the drum. Daddy's going to get one. He's written to the shop man. Daddy's going to get one as soon as he can come. Here's another one that I like. It's called The Dormouse and the Doctor. There once was a dormouse who lived in a bed of delphiniums blue and geraniums red. And all the day long he'd a wonderful view of geraniums red, delphiniums blue. Well, a doctor came hurrying around and he said, "Tut, tut, I'm so sorry to find you in bed. Just say 99 while I look at your chest. Don't you find that chrysanthemums answer the best?" The dormouse looked round at the view and replied, when he'd said 99, that he'd tried and he'd tried. But much of the most answering things that he knew were geraniums red and delphiniums blue. The doctor stood frowning and shaking his head, and he took up his shiny silk hat and he said, "What the patient requires is a change," and he went to see some chrysanthemum people in Kent. The dormouse lay there, and he gazed at the view of geraniums red and delphiniums blue. And he knew there was nothing he wanted instead of delphiniums blue and geraniums red. The doctor came back, and to show what he meant, he had brought some chrysanthemums cuttings from Kent. Now these, he remarked, gave a much better view than geraniums red and delphiniums blue. They took out their spades and they dug up the bed of delphiniums blue and geraniums red, and they planted chrysanthemums yellow and white. "And now," said the doctor, "we'll soon have you right." The dormouse looked out, and he said with a sigh, "I suppose all these people know better than I. It was silly perhaps, but I did like the view of geraniums red and delphiniums blue." Well, the doctor came round and examined his chest and ordered him nourishment, tonics, and rest. "How very effective," he said as he shook the thermometer. "All these chrysanthemums look." The dormouse turned over to shut out the sight of the endless chrysanthemums yellow and white. How lovely, he thought, to be back in a bed of delphiniums blue and geraniums red. The doctor said, "Tut, it's another attack," and ordered him milk and massage at the back, and freedom from worry and drives in a car, and murmured, "How sweet your chrysanthemums are." The dormouse lay there with his paws in his eyes and imagined himself such a pleasant surprise. "I'll pretend the chrysanthemums turned to a bed of delphiniums blue and geraniums red." And the doctor next morning was rubbing his hands and saying, "There's nobody quite understands these cases as I do. The cure has begun. How fresh the chrysanthemums look in the sun." The dormouse lay happy. His eyes were so tight, and he could see no chrysanthemums yellow or white. And all that he felt at the back of his head were delphiniums blue and geraniums red. And that is the reason, Aunt Emily said, if a dormouse gets in a chrysanthemum bed, you will find so Aunt Emily says, that he lies fast asleep in his front with his paws in his eyes. I'm looking for another one. Oh, here's one. I like this one. Have you ever just sat on the stairs by yourself? That's what this one's about. Halfway down the stairs is a stair where I sit. There isn't any other stair quite like it. I'm not at the bottom, and I'm not at the top, so this is the stair where I always stop. Halfway up the stairs isn't up and it isn't down. It isn't in the nursery. It isn't in the town. And all sorts of funny thoughts run round my head. It isn't really anywhere. It's somewhere else instead. I like that. I like to just sit sometimes, and just have my thoughts. If I were a king, you ever wish you were a king or a queen? I often wish I were a king, and then I could do anything. If only I were king of Spain, I'd take my hat off in the rain. If only I were king of France, I wouldn't brush my hair for ants. I think if I were king of Greece, I'd push things off the mantelpiece. If I were king of Norway, I'd ask an elephant to stay. If I were king of Babylon, I'd leave my button gloves undone. If I were king of Timbuktu, I'd think of lovely things to do. If I were king of anything, I'd tell the soldiers, I'm the king. I'm going to read two more. This one's called Buckingham Palace. This is a place in England where the Queen lives now. This poetry book was written when the Queen wasn't born yet, and so there was a king. The changing guard at Buckingham Palace, Christopher Robin went down with Alice. Alice is marrying one of the guard. A soldier's life is terribly hard, said Alice. The changing guard at Buckingham Palace, and Christopher Robin went down with Alice. We saw a guard in a sentry box. One of the sergeants looks after their socks, says Alice. The changing guard at Buckingham Palace, and Christopher Robin went down with Alice. We looked for the king, but he never came. Well, God take care of him all the same, says Alice. They're changing guard at Buckingham Palace, and Christopher Robin went down with Alice. They've great big parties inside the grounds. I wouldn't be king for 100 pounds, says Alice. The changing guard at Buckingham Palace, Christopher Robin went down with Alice. A face looked out, but it wasn't the king's. He's much too busy assigning things, says Alice. The changing guard at Buckingham Palace, Christopher Robin went down with Alice. Do you think the king knows all about me? Sure to, dear, but it's time for tea, says Alice. And I think I'll read as the last one. It's called Vespers. And sometimes when people go to sleep, they kneel down and they say a prayer. Or sometimes when I go to sleep, I lie down on my pillow and I see a pink light. And I think warm, loving thoughts and know how much I'm loved. And sometimes I get pictures in my mind and I talk to them. Anyway, this one is called Vespers. Yeah. And in this one, it's a little boy who's kneeling down and he's saying his prayers. Little boy kneels at the foot of the bed, droops on the little hands, little gold head. Hush, hush, whisper who dares. Christopher Robin is saying his prayers. God bless Mummy. I know that's right. Wasn't it fun in the bath tonight? The cold so cold and the hot so hot. Oh, God bless Daddy, I quite forgot. And if I open my eyes just a little bit more, of my fingers a little bit more, I can see Nanny's dressing gown on the door. It's a beautiful blue, but it hasn't a hood. Oh, God bless Nanny and make her good. Mine has a hood, and I lie in bed and I put the hood right over my head and I shut my eyes and I curl up small and nobody knows that I'm there at all. Oh, thank you, God, for a lovely day. What was the other I had to say? I said, God bless Daddy. So what can it be? Oh, now I remember. God bless me. Little boy kneels at the foot of the bed, droops on little hands, little gold head. Hush, hush, whisper who dares. Christopher Robin is saying his prayers. Those are our stories for now. I love you.